I'm Ron Flagg, president of LSC, and I spent a lot of my time as president of LSC talking about the justice gap. We've heard about it today. 92% of legal problems around the country and here in Michigan receiving no or inadequate assistance. A really staggering statistic and not one that the country can be proud of. And the answer, or the key to bridging a gap so wide, is leadership and innovation. And I think while the focus of our forum today is on housing, I think an important theme that we're going to hear from all of our speakers, certainly we heard it from the last panel, is the importance of leadership and innovation to bridge the justice gap in the context of housing issues. That's going to continue with my conversation coming up. We're talking about a particular housing issue. It's entitled Keeping the Family Home in the Family. And in particular, we're talking about heirs property. With me today are two people who are both leaders and innovators and are going to talk about applying leadership and innovation to address the heirs property problem. Ashley Lowe, as many of you know, is the CEO of Lakeshore Legal Aid here in Detroit and the surrounding counties. Darnell Adams is Vice President of Detroit Community Initiatives at the Gilbert Family Foundation, a philanthropy founded by Dan and Jennifer Gilbert and working in tandem with the Rock family of companies to build opportunities for Detroiters. Ashley, why don't we jump right in and tell us what heirs property is and why it's a challenge.
So heirs properties is when, it usually is multi-generational. So when property is passed down from generation to generation, but there's no legal process that makes it, gives people proof that they actually own the property. So it could be a situation where there's a will or there's not a will, but they don't go through legal process. The family doesn't. They know they inherited this property from their parents or their grandparents, and they remain living in the home, but they haven't gone through the legal process, so they don't have a deed or something to show that.
I mean, okay, you know, they're living there, they don't have a deed. You know, where does that trip them up going forward? As long as, you know, nobody bothers them, they're okay.
And that happens for a long time. So there could be generations where nobody has really addressed this issue. And then the person who's living in the home that thinks they own it, they go to access some sort of benefit that is related to home ownership. So they may be getting access to the winterization program from a city, or getting a replacement on a heater or some other home loan, and then they have to show proof that they own the property, but they don't. And they don't have that proof. And so that's where they come either to a community partner or to legal aid to say, how can you help me figure this piece out?
Darnell, talk about, we think about this all the time in housing and evictions, the fact that when an eviction happens, the ripple effect in terms of education and employment and family issues. But what about the ripple effect in terms of heirs property? When a family is kept in a home, how does that affect a block, a neighborhood, a community?
It's always better to have a home occupied than vacant. And to Ashley's point, it's when a family seeks out a resource. You know, there are tax abatements that the city offers for certain income bands. And that's actually how, you know, we sort of discovered that this was a major issue across the city, because as many families, there are about 50,000 families that qualify for a program called Homeowners Property Tax Exemption through the city of Detroit, where you can get a reduced tax payment, whether it's 100% exemption all the way down to like 10%. And what we were finding is that a lot of families were coming in, they didn't own the home. You know, they didn't pass down, but they didn't know that they needed to do some type of transfer, which prevented them from owning that home. And so if you can't access those benefits, then you eventually just maybe have to walk away from the home because it can't receive the resources that it needs. And in a previous life, I was working for the Detroit Land Bank Authority, and we learned that, and this is 10 years ago, before inflation, before COVID, So I'm sure the cost is much higher, but with all the city resources that go into litigating, taking that property back, the foreclosure process, the demolition process, that's totaling more than $100,000 for just that one parcel. And it's creating, it's shredding more value on that block because the more houses you have that come down, the less valuable that block may be. So it can have dramatic ripple effects, but by having that family there and having those resources there, it preserves that value for that neighborhood.
And so where the leadership and innovation in this whole conversation comes in is the recognition of what you just said and the leadership and collaboration among your organization, the city, and Legal Aid. Can you talk about how that evolved?
Yeah, so I learned about Lakeshore Legal Aid probably in 2018 from one of Ashley's team members, Sean Riddle. We're serving the board together, and only heard great things. And as I came to be in this role at the Gilbert Family Foundation, we put out an RFP to see, are there legal aid partners that can help with right to counsel work? The city had just passed the right to counsel ordinance, and we do a lot of listening on the ground to see who are the right partners that that trust in community. And so we started this work through the right to counsel ordinance that kicked off, and we call it the Detroit Eviction Defense Fund, where we have 3 partners, Lakeshore being one, Michigan Legal Services, and UCHC being the other, to really just help make sure that families have access to legal services when they're being challenged with eviction.
Ashley, you describe people living in a house for generations in blissful ignorance of the fact that their ownership of the house was not documented formally. It strikes me, as in many cases, that public education is a key piece to make sure that before they come to grief, they address that lack of formal documentation. So how do you go about doing outreach in this situation? Darnell mentioned the term trust. Legal Aid is always looking for trusted messengers in communities where trust is often lacking. So how does that work in the heirs property arena?
Yeah, so we, in addition to working with the Gilbert Family Foundation, we are working with the Local Initiative Support Corporation that's helping us to drill down in specific neighborhoods and work really closely with community partners, those partners being trusted in the communities. So in the Bagley neighborhood, we're working with Live 6. In the airport sub, we are working with the Eastside Community Foundation. And those are organizations that are connected in the communities. People know them. They also have funding to provide home repair services, so people are seeking them out if they are homeowners who are in precarious situations, and so they know to go, and then those organizations connect them with Lakeshore and our other community partner, Michigan Legal Services, so that so they know when they get there that this is a trusted resource in the community.
And that answer, just really shines a spotlight on how important it is for legal aid programs to be part of their communities. They're not just sitting in their offices waiting for people to come to them, but they're actively in the communities, that they're meeting clients or potential clients where they are. It's so important. Darnell, as you described, this is not the first time you've collaborated with Legal Aid. The Gilbert Family Foundation really did showed great leadership and initiative in the investment on the eviction, representation initiative. What has your past collaboration with Lakeshore and the other legal aid providers taught you, or how has it informed your philanthropic strategy?
That's a good question. So the most important thing is making sure that we're having the impact that we're looking for. And I can say very easily that the reports that come back and the results of the Eviction Defense Fund work is showing that, what we thought was true which is most families, about 4% of families had access to legal services, and whereas landlords showed up to court with over 83% of landlords had representation, and we were watching more and more families be displaced through eviction. And as soon as we started working with these partners, I mean, those numbers dramatically dropped. So we understand their value, and even with the heirs property work, the probate work that we're doing, again, because we had that trusted relationship, we just dug in deeper and asked, is this another component that you're willing to like step up and support? And it was an infrastructure that already existed. So it was, again, a very easy sort of collaboration that, again, we're netting positive benefits. Something I wanted to just add that you said earlier is the most important piece to the heirs property work is setting the culture, like the cultural norm of estate planning. As we started this probate work, this is getting enough attention that people are aware, their heads are up, they're listening, they understand that there are over 5,000 houses currently in the city of Detroit that are experiencing some type of tangle title, and there are thousands at risk. But the biggest opportunity, and we're doing this work with Lakeshore and with Neighborhood Legal Services, is once you get through probate, let's get you an estate plan. Once you get through a HOPE exemption, let's get you an estate plan. These are things that should just be the cultural norm that we see every day with these programs.
That's great, and it's so important. And of course, we all know that culture change is really hard.
Yeah.
Ashley, I love statistics. I mean, it's a horrible statistic, the justice gap statistic. But what's really much more compelling than statistics are client impact and client stories. Can you share a story in this area of your work?
Yeah, I'd love to. And this was a story that our supervisor on the project described it as Herculean efforts on behalf of legal aid. So it's a gem. We represented a client who was living with her child in the home of her father who had passed away. So he died in the fall of 2023. They were living in the home. They didn't know at the time that he had mortgaged the property and that they owed about $11,000 on the home. And they found out, of course, when the foreclosure process started. So they got notice of that and went to the mortgage company and tried. They had the $11,000 among their family members to pay it off. And they went to the mortgage company and they said, no, you don't have a property interest and we can't take this money from you and solve the mortgage. So they tried and kept going back and trying, and to no avail. And it went to a sheriff's sale. A third-party buyer purchased the home for $5,000. So in theory, they could go to the county and redeem the property for $5,000, which they had. And so they went to the county, and the county said, well, there's no deed recorded that shows that this has been purchased, so we can't do anything for you. So the client worked as hard as she could to work with the mortgage company, work with the third-party buyer, work with the sheriff to get the deed recorded. None of that was successful. So in February of this year, she reached out to Lakeshore, and we tried to do the same thing. We tried that negotiating piece, also failed, and ended up filing a probate case. The trick was that by the time the case got to us, we were getting really close to the end of the redemption period. So they were moving as fast as possible, so they filed a petition in probate, got an emergency motion to stay the redemption period, get the letters of authority to go in and take action, and then they were able to, had to file a motion to get the sheriff to submit the deed and file it so that they could redeem the property, which they did in time before the redemption period ended, and now are living comfortably in the home that they own.
That's right.
Last question. I always love when we at LSC or our grantees start an initiative or an innovation. I mean, what you have to have, your North Star's got to be, what do we want this to look like in 5 years? So Darnell, what do we want this initiative to accomplish? What do we want Detroit to look like in this context in 5 years?
Well, if anybody's watching the news, you saw how New York City was flooding. I think that we are living in a very climate resilient community that will be vulnerable to investors, speculators, et cetera. And I want us, again, to have a cultural norm where residents understand if I'm buying a property, I'm not afraid of death. I'm going to make sure I have an estate plan in place for my family. And having that cultural norm so easy that there's technology with legal aid partners that makes it easy to gamify creating pulling your assets into a plan and just making it the norm. And there are other way more creative ways we could dig into this with the city as you are following that PTA. Lots of ways to make sure that there are touch points around education so that the norm is there. So in 5 years, maybe 25% of all new homes that are being purchased across the city are also filing for an estate plan.
Ashley, let me broaden the question for you. You can answer the same question, but also just in 5 years, how would you like to see partnerships between the city, foundations such as Darnell's and legal aid playing out?
So thanks for that question. This is a really good example of what I would like to see in the future. Working with Darnell is such a treat because what the Gilbert Family Foundation does is they listen, they hear what's going on in the community, and they get an inkling that there's a problem. They commission a study, they get the research, they get a report that shows what kind of impact we could have and what's necessary, and then they reach out. They bring in the partners who are doing the work in the community or who could do the work if they're not already doing it. And the multiple layers. So this is a project, we're doing the probate litigation in this work. Other organizations are doing the estate planning. And we do a little bit, but it's mostly we're doing litigation and other groups are funded by the city to do the estate planning. And we're all doing efforts to do communication and outreach in the community. So that kind of collaboration, that integrated effort, and then seeing a problem and putting resources towards it really makes a difference.
Darnell and Ashley, thank you for your leadership and innovation, and please join me in thanking you.
Thank you.